this is gone, and the earthquakes will weather away when the breathlessness is hushed, and the best is burned to grey. When the magic is lost in passion and promises fades, when tenderness is far with the rest, it fades. The end of love, the end of love. We find love at the end of love, the end of love.
Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, The Diaries of DIY Danie. Can we all just take a breath? Because this isolation has got me feeling blue. So much that I'm wearing all blue. I didn't do this purposely. I gotta be honest with you guys, I have been feeling a little down. You know, I think this isolation has us going through a roller coaster of emotions. Last week, you know, I was getting ready to do part 3 of the living room makeover, and I just couldn't. I was just feeling like I needed to slow down. So I thought it would be fun to come up with some DIY ideas that were a little bit more meditative, which is something that I needed right now. So I'm going to be showing you how I made 5 no-kiln clay projects. There's no theme to these. A lot of these projects were inspired by Pinterest items that I found through my nightly Pinterest scrolling. So much that I'm pretty sure this episode could have been a Pinterest made me do it. So I'll make sure that I link all of my inspiration in the description box if you want to check them out. Oh, and if you're not subscribed to my channel yet, make sure you hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if you liked any of the projects. So without further ado, get yourself cozy, grab a pillow, grab a blanket, and let's make some clay projects. Boop. For my first project, I'm making these speckled rib taper candle holders. I've had these beautiful dark green candles for quite some time now. I found them in a pack of 8 at a thrift store eons ago and felt it was finally time to create something cute for them to sit in. To start, I'm taking a ball of air-dried clay and working it in my hands. I always find it's best to warm up the clay because it makes it more malleable to play with. Once I was happy with it, I took a small section of that clay and began to roll it out into a coiled shape. Using my tapered candles as my guide, I wrapped my clay coil around the candle and cut it using my scraper. To connect the 2 sides together to create a donut, I made little scores on one of the ends. Added a little slip. Slip is a mix of clay and water, and connected the 2 pieces together. Basically, you score to give something for the clay to grab onto when you connect them together, and then the slip acts as a glue. To smooth it out, I carefully molded the sides using slip and my loop. Although most times, I found it pretty easy to just use my fingers. Once I was happy with the look, I set the first donut aside and then repeated this step until I had 2 completed donuts. To connect the 2 pieces, again I scored the top of the first donut, added a little bit of slip, and placed the second donut on top. Repeat this step for the last donut. To smooth out the completed piece, again I just simply used some slip and my finger until I was really happy with the look. At this point, I needed to bring back the candle just to ensure that the holder was the correct size. And now all I needed to do was create 2 more. After giving them 24 hours to dry, these babies were ready to be painted. Keep in mind that depending on the climate in your home and the thickness of the piece, this could impact the drying time. You'll know when air dry clay is completely dry because it turns like a chalky white look. Using a fine grit sandpaper, I simply rounded out the edges and removed rough sections that I didn't like. Using a basic acrylic paint, I believe this one was called Titanium White, I painted the outside of all 3 candle holders. To give these a little more personality, I brought back my dark green paint mix I used to paint my pottery pieces in my living room makeover. This was a mix of Annie Sloan chalk paint colors Amsterdam green and Athenian black. Using 2 brushes, I created a freckled splatter look by tapping one brush on the other. I love the way that the dark green looked against the white, and it was just such a great way to give these candle holders a bit of something, you know? Once that was dry, I gave all 3 holders a protective top coat using a satin varnish. And just like that, I had 3 beautiful DIY candle holders that could finally hold my dark green taper candles. These holders were stylish and modern, yet held on to that organic feel that I personally love so much. Leading into a less perfected look has always been a goal for me, as most DIY projects aren't perfect, so why hold yourself to that pedestal? I love these on my table and I couldn't be happier with the way that they turned out. And of course, if you're gonna make these candle holders, just never leave a lit candle unattended. Let's practice some fire safety, folks. Moving on to my second project, I have been totally inspired by a French ceramic artist named Claire Payne. She is a maker who models her ceramic pieces from a more natural, raw, brutal, earthy place. I'll link her work in my description box, but there was one piece in particular that I loved, which was this gorgeous fruit bowl. Now, to buy something like this was a little outside my budget, but I felt inspired to create my own version of this and figured, why not? To start, I needed something to help me build my bowl shape, so I used this big glass bowl I had in my kitchen. Setting that aside for a moment, I worked through my clay again, warming it up so that it was easier to work with. At first I thought I was going to roll out the clay and cut each piece, but I actually decided it was easier to just create thick coils and shape it right onto the bowl. Each coil must have been close to about an inch thick. I created 3 coils all parallel to each other, then proceeded to create the cross pieces. But before I attached them, I scored the coils and added a little slip. The middle section dipped down a little because I needed to push them into the parallel coils, so I simply just added more clay to those sections and made sure I worked it into the coil with slip. If I found any cracks or edges that looked a little questionable, especially in the spots where 2 clay pieces were formed together, I would use my needle tool, score the 2 areas together, and smooth it out with slip. I then simply repeated this technique across and used the same principles to build the bowl edges. I cut about halfway when I realized it probably would have been a good idea to put wax paper underneath to create a layer between the clay and the bowl. Of course, I didn't have wax paper, so I simply just used parchment paper. It's kind of the same thing. If you plan to create a project similar to this, I very much suggest starting with the paper from the beginning. Don't do what I did. Whoops. Now that I was back on track, I continued molding the entire bowl shape, adding more clay to any sections that felt weak or needed a little reinforcement. Once I was happy with the shape, I used the wax paper to lift the bowl up and turn the piece over. This allowed me to work out any of those cracks that formed underneath and reinforce any sections I couldn't reach before. As a last step, again, I used slip and my hands, and I simply just smoothed the entire thing out. You kind of just have to wing this section. I mean, there's no right or wrong answer in terms of how it's gonna look, because anybody who does this, it's never gonna look the same. Now it was time to let it dry. It took 3 full days of drying time. This was one thick piece. And again, you'll know it's ready when the entire piece turns white. At this point, my goal was to work out any edges I didn't like using a small grit sandpaper. I was being very careful about pressure, but honestly, this piece felt solid. I was pretty impressed. To keep in theme of its raw, organic look, I chose not to paint this one. Instead, I went straight to adding my satin varnish on top just to give it a nice protective top coat. I coated the inside first, let that dry, and then turned it over and coated the back. Voila! A beautiful, raw-inspired fruit bowl that I personally think looks pretty darn good, considering I really did wing this one. I had no idea if it would even work, knowing a piece like this really should be created with proper clay and a kiln, but I gotta say, it felt solid and it worked and looked exactly the way I wanted it to. It had a few rough edges, but realistically, that was kind of the point. I leaned into it, tried something new, something I've always wanted to do, and I think the final product wasn't too bad at all. A lovely organic fruit bowl. Moving on to the third project, I've always loved the look of a hanging eucalyptus, and it's been such a bummer not being able to find any during isolation. So I decided to get crafty and create this adorable hanging eucalyptus bunch that was this little decor piece that I didn't know I needed until I made it. To create this, I took a real dried silver dollar eucalyptus leaf I had from an old plant and used this as my guide to create a template on an old piece of cardboard. Once I was happy with the look, I cut it out using scissors and I was ready to start molding. Again, starting with a ball of clay and my rolling pin, I rolled out a section that was 1/4 of an inch thick. Then placed my new leaf template on top and used my blade to cut it out. I shaped the sides a little and then used my needle tool to create the veins. To allow these leaves to be attachable, I used a wood stir stick and poked a hole through the bottom, then cut the leaf in my hand to warp it a little and give it a more realistic shape. Pretty cool, huh? I then simply repeated this step 61 more times. Or really until all my air dry clay ran out. I then let these dry for 24 hours. Ready to paint, I decided I didn't want to use acrylic paint to give these leaves some life. Instead, I opted for my watercolor palette. I felt like I would have more control with watercolor to get that lighter, more transparent look that I wanted. Of course, if you're going to use watercolor on an air dry clay, you do need to be careful as you are reapplying water to the surface, so there will be a bit of softening. But it's totally fine and you can totally add watercolor or acrylic. You just need to apply one coat, let it dry, and then come back to it if you wish to apply another coat. As you can see here, I went for a mossy green color, a more yellowy green, and at times I added a quick top coat of bright yellow to give it a bit of a yellowy tinge. I thought this was kind of fun. Can you spot the real eucalyptus leaf in the bunch? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Once all the leaves were dry, I dabbed a small bit of varnish on each and made sure each leaf got a nice protective top coat. As you can see, I'm using a different varnish here as my other varnish ran out, but thank the heavens I had to. To create the hanging portion of my eucalyptus bunch, I had two things, fabric glue and twine. First step was to start by cutting off a long piece of twine string and tying a knot at one end. Then taking my first leaf, I turned it over and ran the twine through the back. This was important so that the leaf sat nicely in front of the knot. I then added a second knot about 1/2 inch above and added the second eucalyptus leaf. This way the top leaf kind of draped over the bottom leaf nicely. Then simply repeat this a few times on one string. I attached about 2 wing-shaped versions along with the bottom 2 that simply hung. Those leaves were not falling off, and if you saw my DIY wood garland, you know what happened if you don't do this. We have a DIY wood. Then start over. At a certain point, I found it easier to start laying finished strings beside each other to kind of get a feel where I should knot and attach a wing leaf on the next one to ensure my decorative piece would look nice and full. I think I created close to 10 strings, but at the end I simply compiled all the strings together and tied a nice knot at the top. And there you have it, a beautiful, decorative, farmhouse chic, upside down eucalyptus branch. I love this. I know this one might not attract to all of you, but I certainly adore it in my home. I just love how it gives my space just like a touch of whimsy. It's a conversation piece, and what I love about this the most is that you don't have to create eucalyptus. This idea could translate to any type of plant or floral piece. I look forward to the day I have more air dry clay to experiment with the possibilities. You guys know how much I love plants, so for my fourth project, I'm creating a cute air plant wall hanger that is perfect for any space and so simple to create. Now that all my air dry clay was used up, for this project, I'm using sculpting clay. I didn't have a lot of this left in my house, but certainly enough for 2 simple projects. Sculpting clay is a little different from air dry clay as it has to be baked in the oven. To start, I'm taking my clay and rolling it out flat with my rolling pin, leaving it about 1/4 inch thick. Once I had the right thickness, I started squaring it off with my hands. I could have cut it, but I didn't want to waste anything, so I simply just used my wood tools and hands to shape it out. As a fun decorative element, I added little holes on both sides using my needle tool. I then created 2 square holes on each end and cut it out using my blade. Okay, so now for the fun part. I wanted this planter to have a nice curve to it, so I'm using a mug I had in my home. I simply just placed it on top of the mug and then put that mug right into the oven at 275 degrees for 15 minutes. Once it was done and cooled, it was time to paint this bad boy. Using my titanium white acrylic paint, I simply painted each side. Just note that this did end up needing 2 coats of paint to really give it good coverage. Once the paint was dry, I covered the piece in my satin varnish to give it a protective coat. And as the last step, I took some chunky twine and looped a lark's head knot around each hole and simply tied it off at the top with a knot. And holy doodle, was that not easy or what? This is the cutest airplane hanger, am I right? I just love it for my kitchen space, and I love that it can easily be personalized using different colors and designs. I like the plain white feel, but of course if you do this in your own home, feel free to personalize it, paint it a color, add some decorative elements, have fun and make it your own. As the last product for this video, I'm making this adorable decorative rainbow wall piece. It's so simple to make and adds so much personality and texture to a space. I just love it, it's so cute. First up, I'm working the clay in my hands, warming it up. You know the drill by now. And I'm using my hands to roll out a smooth looking coil. You want to try and make sure you keep it the same thickness all the way around. I'm just pressing it in with my hands, but don't worry about the fingerprints, we can smooth that out. Taking my rolling pin, I'm simply flattening out my rainbow, and you can see how it all really smooths out this way. From there, I found it really helpful to use my wood tool to help shape the edges. Once I was happy with the shape, I used my needle tool to create a small hole in the back at the top. This was going to be my nail hole so that I could hang it properly on the wall without seeing the nail. Last step, I added 2 holes at each end of my rainbow using a large wooden toothpick. Now off to the oven, again at 275 for 15 minutes. Once that was dry, I used white acrylic paint again to give it a nice crisp top coat. And of course, like a broken record, I applied the varnish on top. Now the fun part of this piece, the texture. I had this beautiful green yarn that I've been dying to use, and I knew now was finally the time. So using a scrap piece of styrofoam, you can also use cardboard for this, I wrapped the yarn around the styrofoam, and once I was happy with the thickness, I cut the string. Now using a thick sewing needle, you can find these larger needles at any craft store. I threaded a small piece of yarn through the back, and then proceeded to thread it through my rainbow and tied it off. I did notice it needed a second tie around, so I just took a second piece of yarn, pulled it through, and again tied it off in the back. And then as a last step, I simply took my scissors and trimmed the end of the tassel, and there you go. Just repeat this for the second side. Voila! A cute, trendy clay rainbow wall hanging in your home. I gotta say, in retrospect, I maybe should have painted the rainbow peach to kind of help it stand out against my white walls, but all in all, I think the DIY was a massive success and I love it so much. I plan on trying to incorporate it into my gallery wall to give my wall a bit of whimsy and fun, but for now, I will enjoy it on my wall. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys all enjoyed these 5 projects and at least found inspiration in one of them. I'm just happy that I took a moment to slow down and do some projects that were a little bit more meditative and really fun. They've made my home feel kind of whimsical and creative, something I definitely needed in this giant looming isolation. Let me know, what was your favorite project out of the 5? And I will see you guys next week. Bye-bye.